Welcome to our interview series, where we shine a spotlight on NAPSA-approved members who are making a real difference in the property sourcing industry. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Iyabo Agiri, Director of Agiri Property Solutions Ltd. Welcome, Iyabo.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you very much for inviting me to this interview. I'm looking very much forward to it.
You are very welcome. Now, your company specialises in sourcing and packaging HMOs and supported living projects for investors around Kent, South East London, Essex, I believe.
That's correct, yes.
And we're excited to learn about your journey and your expertise and why working with a NAPSA registered agent like yourself is so important. So we've got some questions for you. And we'll be really looking forward to your responses. So I guess the first segment that we're going to cover is, why property in itself? I know that for almost 30 years you were in IT. So what instituted the change?
Well, I've always had an interest in property from quite an early age, watching quite avidly property programs such as Property Ladder, Sarah Beanie back in the day, watching it in wonderment and wondering these ordinary people taking on these huge projects, spending lots of money to transform these houses, these wrecks into beautiful homes for people, and I always thought it was out of my reach, and it was just something that I could never get into myself, but I had the interest there. Moved into IT, which is great, very much process driven, very much, again, finding solutions that are challenging to people. And along the way, I've always had that, seen that alignment with property. And I also I've worked in the public sector and the private sector. I worked for housing teams. And again, seeing homelessness as a big issue, particularly in local authorities, it piqued my interest a bit more. Much later on in my IT career, I started to seriously think about property and how it can make a difference to people's lives. Actually taking on projects, because I was a project manager for a while, and I could see some synergy in terms of producing something that met people's needs, wonderful homes that people could live in. So that's where it all started from, really. So there was always an alignment with what I was doing professionally, with my enjoyment in terms of property and what you could achieve from property.
So part of your focus is on supported living projects. What drew you to that area and why do you think it's such an impactful investment strategy?
Again, that comes from my background of working in the public sector. I worked for local authorities in some I would say, some local authorities where the needs from residents was quite high. People use the word deprived situations, but they are in many cases. There's a lot of homelessness in some of the local authorities I worked in London. So I always saw it as a huge need and something that local authorities struggled to meet in terms of the demand. So that's where it essentially started from. I also worked for quite closely with adult social services. So I could identify issues where people with disabilities, mental health conditions, they were struggling to find property to live independently. Unfortunately, they were having to be assigned into either hospitalized care or residential care. But there was always the option. There should always have been an option that to allow them to live independently with the right sort of support. But the problem was demand just outstripped the supply. There was never enough accommodation to house people. So that's why I got into it, just to find a solution to that sort of a situation, to help house people who had most need for accommodation.
And you focus around the Essex, Kent and South East London areas. What makes these areas ideal for HMOs and supported living projects here?
Well, the demand is everywhere in the UK. If you see the figures in terms of the numbers, the unmet demand is throughout the UK, but it's more to do with it's the area I know. I mean, I've always been based down south. I've lived in London all my life. In terms of the local authorities, I've worked for the NHS as well in these areas. So I've already got those connections with the right sort of commissioners, the right sort of teams. I understand how those local authorities operate. So I see it as an advantage in the way in which I can move forward to finding solutions rather than moving to another area where I have to establish new links, get an understanding in terms of how they operate. It's just by way of getting things to move a lot quicker, and that's through familiarisation of the areas that I know already.
Yeah, I think with you having the background that you've got and the contacts that you already have, that makes opening the necessary doors a lot easier from your perspective. Whereas for someone just starting out, so for argument's sake, an investor looking at supported living, what specific challenges are there or trends in specifically your region, and maybe they may be mirrored across the UK, that investors should be aware of?
Yeah, I think that one of the main challenges is really just really a lack of understanding what supported living is all about. Unfortunately, there are some I would say misconceptions around it, and I when talking to investors or prospective people who are clients who are interested in this area, it's quite clear that um, I have to do upfront some sort of knowledge. Passing on about what supported living is about and what it isn't, and that's based on, unfortunately, some wrong information that's gone out there. So it's just getting the message across about what it really is about. And as I mentioned, you mentioned about it being socially impactful, and that should be what it should be about at the get-go. You're dealing with vulnerable people with complex needs, and anything that needs to be done to help needs to focus on the need of the individual first before anything else. Anything that follows on by way of financial benefit, that's fine, fantastic, that can happen. But the focus should be on making sure that we help people first, and that's so important. So it's just making sure the right message gets across about what it is, and also come with the point of view that people, we're trying to help people, and that's the main focus of supported living. I would hope that with my expertise, that any investor that's looking to get into this area wouldn't worry too much about knowing everything about supported living, because the main benefit I would bring would be having the right sort of connections, because it really is about connecting with the right people, whether that's care providers, local authorities, housing association, and establishing those relationships and understanding what their requirements are about. And I'll take away some of that load from an investor. Obviously, they'll be aware from a socially impactful area, but they wouldn't have to get into the deep diving in terms of establishing those connections and knowing who to speak to.
Can you give us a sort of an overview of the different types of accommodation that you find for the supported living sector? I know part of my background was domiciliary and supported living, so I know that you can cover a myriad of different issues, different physical disabilities, mental health. From your perspective in your area, what sort of support is given? What types of houses, accommodation are being looked for, and the types of clients, tenants that will be residing in those properties?
Yeah, overwhelmingly at the moment, local authorities and care providers are looking for blocks of flats. And that's purely because the whole ethos around independence, having your own front door key, and people, being able to control that sort of environment themselves. The independence aspect of it. So we're looking at minimum of what are called cluster apartments, minimum of 5 units, no more than 14. That's usually the kind of usual number we're talking about. Also, some shared houses, but shared houses are not as popular as they used to. Shared houses, also known as HMOs, they're not as popular now, unfortunately, because the type of tenant cohort that's dealt with, you have to be able to find a group of people who can get on. But unfortunately, if one person has to leave, it's very difficult to find someone else who can fit into that sort of environment and get on with the other tenants. So it's a bit more challenging. And the type of tenants cohort we're dealing with, people with learning disabilities, some physical disabilities as well as autism, and some people with mental health diagnosis as well. So those are the type of people that we work on helping.
And with the blocks of flat, is there, I know when I was operating, which was some years ago, and things may have changed, that sometimes one of the flats is for an overnight carer to be present in case there are any issues, so that there's 24/7 support there if needed, yeah?
Yes, that's right. There's different types of support. Something called what's called wake up support. Someone will be there. You might have a carer that comes in, at certain times of the day. It depends on the level of need, or you may have 24/7 support. So yeah, they, as part of the actual development, when we look at design, we have to consider what's called staff accommodation. It could be as simple as an office, a small office, an area for a small office. If it's just occasional drop-ins to provide support, right through to a small area which could have a single bed, for example, sort of a separate shower, if the requirement is for 24 hours support. So it kind of depends, and that's where the understanding of talking to the providers and understanding the requirements comes from before you actually do a design in terms of how the scheme will look.
And so there's no point in an investor just going out and purchasing a block of flats and then trying to find supported living to live in them, because there can be an awful lot of different issues around possibly the area that it's in, the location, the types of flats that they are, the size of them, etc.
Yeah, it's a common. I've spoken to so many commissioners and they've been frustrated with this because they've gone to visit schemes and it's so obvious from the get-go. As soon as they walk through the door, it's just not appropriate. So the important thing at the get-go is to get that design brief right, and that is born of the actual person that you're supporting and also the requirements and understanding, to make sure whatever's developed and adapted does meet those requirements. And you're right about amenities. I mean, things like transport, sometimes the staff will might have to come in and out at odd hours, so there must be some sort of transport. Car parking is ideal but not an absolute 100% necessity. It does help, but it needs to be, the schemes tend to need to be somewhere close to a transport link as well to make it easy for staff and family as well, family and friends to get to.
And from the investor perspective, with your experience, how long do tenancies last? Is the tenancy for supported living with the actual care provider? Is it with someone else? Is it with the tenants themselves? How are these things structured, Iyabo, for those that are unsure about how they work?
Yes, the way the schemes work is when we create the developments for specialised supported housing, and when I mean specialised, that's for disabilities, autism, and mental health. We have the leases are with the housing associations. So the housing associations are basically there to actually manage the scheme. So they deal with the maintenance and the repairs. Any issues around, breakages or any problems that need to be resolved from the housing perspective. The care providers were separate. They want a separate arrangement with the local authority, and they're kept completely separate. Now, with in terms of the leases are fully FRI, so full repair and insuring. And that's obviously, as I said, an arrangement with the housing association, and they tend to range in length. They could be 10 years, and I've heard of leases that run for 30 years, because you need to realise these people have lifelong conditions, and it's considered to be their forever home. So once they're there, there's no plan to move them on. Because they need that support. Someone with learning disabilities, it's a lifelong condition, and once they're settled there,
Yeah.
they're settled there. So yes, it's that's one of the advantages in terms of the actual agreement. The actual tenant has a tenancy agreement with the housing association. So again, any developer or investor or landlord will not get involved with that at all. They just basically have that lease agreement with the housing association directly.
And I always remember the term with CQC, Care Quality Commission, is consistency of care is key in this particular sector. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that for them to be able to have that consistency of accommodation, of home, the knowledge that it's a safe place for them and that they're safe there and that they know where they are day in, day out is incredibly important for this sector.
Definitely, yeah, and being close to what they're familiar with as well, wherever possible. Family and friends can come and visit them, so they feel much more comfortable. It's the safety and comfortable part of it, and they also have that additional support from the care providers as well. So it's almost like a wraparound care, but there's an element of independence there as well for them.
Now, Iyabo, Agiri Property Solutions, you're a proud member and an approved member of NAPSA, and you know exactly what you had to go through to achieve that status. Why do you think it's so important for investors to work with professional and compliant sourcing agents?
I think it's extremely important. Unfortunately, we've seen in the social media, just generally, unfortunately, there are people who have come into this sector and have just not got the right compliance in place, or they promise things that they just can never deliver. And unfortunately, some investors have become a little bit nervous about the industry. And I think it's very important to have something like NAPSA, because, as you say, it does take a lot of effort and perseverance to actually become fully compliant, which at the end of the day, I know from people I've spoken to about being a member of NAPSA and what I went through to achieve that compliance, that they're quite happy with that, because it does engender trust. It does engender a position of knowing, you know what you're talking about. You're not just come off a course and just sort of by magic you've started to sort of provide a service. And I think it does bring a level of comfort, and to many people I've spoken to know that I have gone through all the necessary steps in order to be compliant to provide the right sort of service. So I think that's really important, that happens. And what I found is not many people know about NAPSA in the property industry, which is, although that's changing now, but I was quite surprised by that. So I always look forward to always championing its causes and just saying what a good job members do, and always recommend to people. If it's not me, just go on the NAPSA portal and look for someone who does meet your requirements, because it's vitally important to do that.
Oh, thank you for that. And I think your understanding of the fact that compliance has to be met in part is from your care background, where the levels of compliance in care are. If everybody thinks that compliance for sourcing is a headache, don't go into care. That's all I can say.
I agree. Although I worked in IT. It also applies to the IT industry as well. I mean, I've worked
It
for,
does.
you need to follow the right steps. I mean, we took things
You
like
do.
cybersecurity and IT, and just making sure that you follow the right steps, to make sure that you protect your networks and all your computer systems. It's just as important.
Yeah.
You know, I've had to follow the right processes and procedures and gone on training, which is another thing with NAPSA. You know, people are well trained, and that is maintained. It's not like in IT, I had to keep going on training courses every year. I had to requalify for my project management the qualification. It's the same with NAPSA. It's not you go on a course and that's it. You have to maintain that level of development to make sure you remain compliant. So yeah, I identify with that 100%.
NAPSA emphasises professionalism, compliance, and transparency. How do you ensure these values are reflected in your day-to-day operations, Iyabo?
Yeah, I'm again, it comes from my IT background. I'm very much process and procedure driven. I've got systems in place, and I make sure I stick with them. And I don't just create these systems and procedures and that's it. I always look at them, look for signs of improvement to make sure that I'm kept up to date and it just works at how it should work, not only for my own business, but by way of how I actually provide a service to my clients as well. That's so important. So I would say, yeah, making sure that you are organized, good planning, and also making sure you've got the right systems and procedures in place are vitally important.
I agree with you there. At
Hmm.
NAPSA, I don't think we could get through every day without processes and systems and procedures. It's
Hmm.
incredibly important, isn't it? So your
Definitely.
business offers an end-to-end service for supported living projects.
Hmm.
Can you explain a little bit more about what that involves and how it benefits any investors that work with you?
Yes, I mean, by an end to end, it means quite literally that. So I take on all the effort involved, and it can be a long drawn out effort. It's not like a standard, looking for a standard property, because there's a number of factors, as I've mentioned before, in terms of the people you're dealing with and the people you're trying to help. So it starts right from finding the appropriate location, and that will be based on demand, as I mentioned, and also the requirements of the provider and the service, the tenant who will be living there, right through to doing the assessment by way of looking at, is it a right deal? Because you might find a location, but in terms of how the numbers stack, if the numbers don't stack very well for an investor, there's no real point in going ahead, because ultimately they're trying to make money, not lose money. So yeah, right through that whole, sacking the deal, having all the right conversations with the stakeholders, and that's the additional element. By the stakeholders, I mean local authority commissioners, care providers, because you need to make sure they're on board. They know exactly what's happening as well as your investor as well. Right through the procurement side of things, so managing that, so getting the right professionals on board. Whether it's the solicitors, architects, getting the sign off from the local authorities, the approvals to proceed, and then right through to actually doing the works that need to be done. And they can be, depending on the tenant cohort, it could be quite minimal adaptations that are required, right through to quite high level for people with very complex needs. So that, again, it depends there. And finally, once all the work's done and the sign-off has been given, then the actual lease is signed with the housing provider, and it's at that stage where the rental income will come in, start to come into the investor.
Yeah, but for investors who are listening to this and might be a little bit hesitant about entering the world of supported living and moving into projects around that sector, what would you say to reassure them about the value and the impact that this investment strategy has in the sector that it operates in?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reassurance there. I think the number one thing is that obviously you're doing something socially very good to help people. There's huge demand for this type of accommodation, and it also helps the public purse, because I've seen some figures that mention about how much it costs to keep people in hospitalized care or in residential care. It's about 3 or 4 times the amount it would cost if they were living independently in their own home with some support. So that is a big advantage. And also this is government backed. I'm not going to say it's government guaranteed, but it's as close to what we would term a recession-proof type of property income as you can get, because these people are not going anywhere. They're going to be living in their own homes with support, and it's all backed by the government and the local authority. So that's there's some reassurance there, I think, for many investors. And as I mentioned, the leases tend to be quite long as well. So I would say that's quite a major benefit and to the investor. And the rental income is consumer price index linked as well. So there's a review every year with the housing association, and the rents are at. I'm not going to say I'm not going to say specific rents. It just depends. But the rents are quite competitive, and there's the opportunity for rent reviews every year as well.
And finally, what single piece of advice would you give someone if they're considering their first property investment in supported living?
Yeah, I think you need to make sure that I found a mentor. Although I have a property background, I just recognize straight away to get the right sort of connections and speaking to the right people to help vulnerable people. I needed to get that connection with someone who's already in this space, in this industry. So I got myself a mentor, I work with a really fantastic group of people as well as part of the program. So just make sure you've got the right connections, the right knowledge, and always come from a position of giving service first before anything else. If you come into this industry just thinking I'm just going to make money, fast money, quick money, you're not gonna survive for very long in this industry at all, because the sort of people you'll be working with, their main focus is to help vulnerable people before anything else, and they'll probably sniff out anybody who has any other alternative motive, and they just will not work with you. So yeah, those are my main advice, I think, for anybody who's looking to get into supported living.
That's brilliant, thank you. For anyone interested in learning more about Iyabo and Agiri Property Solutions, we'll include links to her website and contact details below. And remember, if you're looking to invest in property, always work with a professional and compliant sourcing agent, just like Iyabo, who does supported housing and HMOs. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next interview. Thank you, Iyabo, for joining us. It's been great chatting with you. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much, Tina, for inviting me, and I hope I got across the message about the supported living and how it's so important for all of us to help in some way. Thank you.
I think you did. Thank you.